And we just look into the effects of electromagnetic frequencies on the body. And we're talking about, this is what Martin Powell has found out through all the scientific peer-reviewed studies, who's a professor emeritus of biochemistry and basic medical sciences at Washington State University. We're talking about reduced fertility, neurological damage, physiological damage, that's organ damage, increased oxidative stress. Now, oxidative stress is an imbalance of free radicals and antioxidants in the body. Apoptosis, which is programmed cell death, cellular DNA damage, hormonal effects, cardiac effects, so increased heartbeat or slowing down of the heartbeat, early onset of Alzheimer's and dementia. We're seeing a lot of people getting brain fog, autism, which has gone up dramatically, especially in children, ADHD. Children's bodies are smaller and their skulls are thinner.
Adapt 2030 Mini Ice Age Conversations covers changes in our climate due to a new and intensifying grand solar minimum. In the media, overlooking, downplaying, or burying cold weather changes occurring on our planet. This is in order to keep the global warming agenda steaming full speed ahead. I do this podcast and radio program because we need to begin conversations on how to adapt our food growing strategies long before 2030 as agricultural zones shift, affecting global crop output, but very few mainstream media outlets are talking about the most important issue of our time, cold weather crop losses. Our sun is going through a 400-year cycle, which has effects on our weather patterns as our magnetosphere weakens and the jet streams go out of flow. It's not CO2, it's not you, it's the sun. Are you ready to thrive in the grand solar minimum? Then join me for Mini Ice Age Conversations. I'm your host, David Dubine. Good afternoon, everyone. Today I have with me John Kitson. He runs the site 5gawareness.com. Now, you've heard me routinely in the last, say, 4 to 5 months talking about what I consider the usage of 5G for crowd control during food shortages as we enter this grand solar minimum. But at the same time, the new bandwidth and the frequency waves that can be carried inside this entire new network, there's much more going on than just using it for crowd control. What about the physiological effects across, what's happening to our minds and our bodies with this new technologies that's being unveiled? There hasn't been that much study. When we talk about a new medicine coming out, how much research should it have to do before a new medicine makes it to market? Well, with 5G, there's been almost zero study done on what the effects would be as we get into this ultra high frequency. So I brought John here to join us today. And, the last time we talked off camera, we had an amazing conversation, rolled on for quite a long time, talking about the interweaving of the changes of society, the collapse of the economy, the rollout of 5G, and everything in Europe with the Unified Defense Force, and a lot of things that we just are not aware of in the United States going on over in Europe and the UK. So this is going to be a different perspective on almost everything you've seen or heard about 5G in the United States and Canada. If you're viewing from that part of the world, if you're from the UK, thanks for joining us as well. John, I do appreciate your time, and the floor is yours. Just let's roll like we did last time. It was such a smooth and easy and effortless conversation. So we're just going to feed off of each other's thoughts and ideas here. Tell us about the conference too. And one last thing here, Radiation Health 2019, that's on September 28th. Again, that's a symposium. It's a meeting, talk, and a different venue to explore and explain more about 5G. So John, thanks for joining me, and it's yours.
Yeah, thanks for having me, David. That's a very important symposium that's coming up. You're going to have a lot of doctors and scientists there speaking about 5G, what exactly 5G is, and the threats regarding the health impacts on all of us. So that will be on Saturday, the 28th of September, 44 Hallam Street in London at 9 a.m. So yeah, please make it if you can, anybody who's watching this. Dr. Martin Powell recently gave an outstanding interview on the 5G Summit, And you can find that linked on my website, 5gawareness.com. And he basically went into what 5G is and the health impact of 5G on biology. So 5G, what a lot of people don't know is that the base coverage of 5G will be below 1 gigahertz. And this will be rolled out through our street lighting system, ranges such as 868 megahertz that Mark Steele's talked about, which have been used in military for scanning. And 5G basically stands for fifth generation, so it's a lot more of what we already have. And it's everything connected with antennas, creating this mesh of radiation like fridges, bins, boilers, thermostats, smart TVs, heaters, your Amazon Echo, Wi-Fi, and then a lot of this smart technology. So smart cities, smart watches, smartphones, smart meters, smart motorways, smart street lighting systems. So it's going to cover absolutely everything communicating with everything else. And then on top of the sub-gigahertz range, you're going to see the higher frequencies being phased in. So your 1 to 6 gigahertz, all the way up to 80 gigahertz, which includes phased array, which they use in the military and they've used for crowd control. And it literally is firing like a microwave beam at you, and you feel your body heating up. It's very toxic indeed. And all we need to do, David, is just have everything going through fiber optic cables to make it safe. We don't need it all around us, penetrating through our bodies. If we have it in cables, we'll be a lot better off. But what was, most interesting is the points that Martin Powell, who's a professor emeritus of biochemistry and basic medical sciences at Washington State University, and he made a statement that putting in tens of millions of antennae without a single biological test of safety has got to be about the stupidest idea anyone has had in the history of the world.
And speaking of cycles, my new book with my co-author Bill Porter, Climate Revolution, a must-read for understanding our sun-driven climate. As we progress deeper into this new Eddie Grand Solar Minimum, weather extremes leading to global food scarcity and higher food prices are here now. This book describes the expected changes, how to survive and thrive during future challenging times, and also practical preparations. The entire book is interactive with over 250 links, so you can click and go out to the scientific aspect of what we're talking about with the repeating cycles in this grand solar minimum. The science is explained so you understand the mechanisms. The solutions are there because we know we're going to face these exact same problems again that were faced in the Maunder minimum, the Sporer minimum, the Wolf minimum. Find designs for building greenhouses, grow guides, beam soil techniques, as well as bioreactors to create your own growth hormones for the soil. Available now, the new Adapt 2030 Climate Revolution. The link's in the description box below.
And we just look into the effects of electromagnetic frequencies on the body. And we're talking about, this is what Martin Powell has found out through all the scientific peer-reviewed studies, neurological damage, physiological damage, that's organ damage, increased oxidative stress. Now, oxidative stress is an imbalance of free radicals and antioxidants in the body. Apoptosis, which is programmed cell death, cellular DNA damage, hormonal effects, cardiac effects, so increased heartbeat or slowing down of the heartbeat, also cardiac death, early onset of Alzheimer's and dementia. We're seeing a lot of people getting brain fog, autism, which has gone up dramatically, especially in children, ADHD. Children's bodies are smaller and their skulls are thinner. So in a lot of primary schools and schools now, you're seeing increasing depression, mental health problems among children. They're much more sensitive to this, and they're getting bombarded constantly with Wi-Fi, smart meters in the schools. And what's interesting is that Lloyd's of London won't insure against electromagnetic frequencies, as well as other insurance companies. And the industry is basically ignoring the effects on the biology. They're looking at only the thermal effects, but not the biological effects. And the safety guidelines are basically fraudulent. They don't take account of these biological effects. And there are about 14,000 studies that show harmful biological effects well below the safety guidelines. And also there's the issue of electric cars, that you're going to have about a dozen different devices inside these electric cars giving off electromagnetic frequencies. And you're inside this electric box, you're in a metal container. So they're bouncing around inside, hitting your body. And then what's also interesting, when you look at plants and insects, and of course we're coming into this time now, as you've correctly stated, where we have to look into growing food. We have to look into food growing systems to look after ourselves and get familiar with plants, food that we can grow. Well, electromagnetic frequencies are very toxic to plants. Now, plants and trees, their reproductive organs are very highly exposed because they're basically based outside of the tree, on the surface of the tree and on the plants, and they're more exposed to these frequencies. So we'll see the impact in trees and insects first. Of course, we've had the massive decline in insects.
With the decreasing magnetosphere on our planet here, with this magnetic pole reversal in play, our magnetic field or magnetic shielding across our Earth is declining to the rate now where there's quite a bit more cosmic radiation penetrating in and actually striking us, galactic cosmic rays. So in addition to what you're talking about with all the, frequency fields around us and the different types of radiation, we're going to have yet another entire layer on that of the buildup and increase in natural galactic cosmic radiation, because stepping forward in next year and then the next year and, looking out into 2025, 2028, our magnetic field is going to be multi-percentages less than it is now. So how do you feel that the coupling of the, I guess it's like an amplified effect, if you will, on top of what is coming naturally and then also what is coming man-made? So what do you think about the double effect that might occur during this time?
Oh, it's going to be pretty devastating, really. I mean, our bodies resonate most with the earth, with something called the Schumann resonance. Some of the best things we can do is to ground. When we're connected with the earth, we're a lot better off. But when we have these things flying around in the air and then coupled along with this natural cycle, with the air becoming more ionized, it's going to be much more intense. So it's exactly as you said in your talk before, that they're sort of adding to this natural cycle. They're taking advantage of it to really maximize the events and make all this stuff happen. Yeah, I mean, the thought comes across my mind that if we don't stop this, then potentially we could have to be living underground to survive it.
Yeah, and that talk that is being referenced here is Ian Crane when he sponsored the event Alternative View 10. And you were there as well, myself. And the talk I gave, you can actually find online there. If you go to Alternative View 10, you can purchase that. I think it's a couple dollars to watch it. But it was about the amplification and the ionization in the atmosphere, and geoengineering programs also piggybacking and riding on top of a natural cycle to amplify and get a larger output. And my comparison was in the 1990s, when our magnetic field was, at 100%, much, much stronger than it is today. The sun was at, full output. The amount of effect that they would get from using nanoparticulates in the atmosphere and then trying to electrify those to get bounce radio waves and do military applications was far greater reduced output than they're getting now for even a quarter of the amount of input that they're putting in, just because there's so much change that's occurred in our atmosphere in terms of just a natural cycle. But then you can ride on top of that and amplify effects. People are really aware down more where you are in the UK than we are in the United States. So you have people coming by the house, you're putting together symposiums, talks, organizing people around your local area, getting more awareness out there. And how long did it take you to get those first couple people to start talking about it to where you are now? You're holding your own events. In the United States, we're not aware of really what's going on with this full 5G rollout. Maybe the UK is smaller, and that's why there's much more understanding. Because when you're trying to go across the entire United States, 3,000 miles this way, 1,500 miles this way, everybody's disconnected. They're all fighting with each other. Everybody's so distracted. And then some other types of companies will roll in and go, hey, 5G. And they're like, oh, okay, great. I don't know anything about it, but it sounds good. Faster internet, cool. That's all they know, because there's been a very deceptive effort in the United States to keep this under wraps. And even in the congressional hearings, they kept trying to dodge the questions, avoid the questions. They admitted there was no studies done medically as to what happened after they rolled out this full system. And it was just, we need to hurry. It's a multi-billion-dollar business, and if we don't get it now, China's going to jump in front, or somebody else is going to jump in front. So we need to move now. And that's what they kept saying, is you're leaving money on the table. You're leaving money on the table if you don't go for it. And that's kind of what Americans know about 5G, unless you've done a little more study. And I'm happy you did. And you've really put the pedal to the metal here and getting awareness around where you are. So it's awesome that people are even coming up to talk to you in your own home.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I do what I can. I've basically been at it for about a year now. Since I held my first major event, which was in Buckfast, Lee, I invited Ian to come and speak. And we had 250 people, and 50 people couldn't actually get in the door. So we had to turn them away because we just couldn't get them in the hall. And then I said to Ian, I said, hey, look, maybe we should go around the country. And he set up his tour. And then I'm also going around on my side and just trying to wake people up. And the most recent talk I did was in Manchester, where I was invited by a lady, Gemma, who runs something called the Sustainability Diaries. Now, you had speakers on there talking about sustainable development, plastics, solar panels, renewable energy, but they didn't have a clue about 5G. And of course, their take on climate change was that we're facing this devastating global warming that's largely man-made. And then, of course, halfway through my 5G talk, I explained to them, well, actually, this is a front because we're getting told that we need all of this technology, the 5G, the smart meters, all of this is being pitched as reducing the carbon footprint, right? And it's going to benefit us in this way. And this is why we need all this technology. And actually, we're being duped, and carbon dioxide is being wrongly demonized.
TrueLeafMarket.com. I really want to talk about growing your own food, which will be a necessity moving forward. There's so many ways that we can go about growing different types of vegetables that we're going to need. Microgreens are incredibly nutritious. They're super fast to grow. In less than a week, you can have something that you can eat. Also, sprouts. We can get those a little bit taller, a little more dense, a little bit larger volume on the vegetation mass coming off of there. So how do you know what kind of sprouts to grow? How about wheatgrass or herbs? What about different types of herbs that we can add to our foods? Now, what I just described to you, there's a full range of starter guides there at TrueLeafMarket.com for you to take a look at. Even if it's just for your own knowledge and you don't purchase something from them, at least get the information so you know how to grow microgreens, you know how to grow sprouts, you understand what some of the herbs are for. TrueLeafMarket.com. Use the link below and give yourself the gift of organic and heirloom seeds.
Yeah, they're just getting away with it. And they're actually using children in adverts now to promote smart meters. It's outrageous.
Yeah, let me drop a point in there. At the bottom of those large masts, there's two cooling towers in it. Because, I sat there and listened to Mark Steele's talk in awe. 95% of what he presented in there about how this 5G works and how it's cooled because it runs at such a high frequency that there's cooling boxes beneath the tower itself. Now, I'm thinking the amount of production and materials that were needed to create the system, the amount of cooling that's going to be needed, how much fossil fuel is going to be burnt just to run this system, and how much carbon dioxide is going to be pushed out just to keep this system cool. Forget the running of it, keeping it cool enough so it doesn't ignite because of the high bandwidth and the frequency on those towers. They want to talk about CO2 mitigation, yet they're rolling out a system that needs to have another cooling tower every 1,000 feet or something. It makes no sense whatsoever.
That's it. Well, it doesn't. And that's one of the great arguments you can use when you're facing some of these people who are, greens, and they really care about the environment. You say, well, actually, let's look at the devastating effect it's going to have on the environment and on trees. And I think that's a really important direction to take, is that they're cutting down millions of trees in the UK, David. And of course, we need trees for oxygen. Trees support a lot of birds and nests and Yeah, without them, we're going to have a devastating effect on the ecology of this planet. So it's a really serious issue. But with 5G, I mean, you've got Dr. Martin Powell. He's basically said that he estimates that in 4 years we'll have population crashes throughout the industrial world. And within 1 year, I think this was 2016, 2017 timeframe, Singapore experienced a 31% drop in reproduction. And he's basically said that this is without 5G, that due to what we know from human and animal studies, and animal studies are very predictive about what happens in humans because, of course, the reproductive cycle is faster, that everything goes faster, and there's a lot of money going into it, which shows that obviously they're working as ways to predict what will happen in humans. From those studies and from what we know from human studies, we probably have about 5 to 7 years until our collective brain function will crash based on exposures we have. And that's without 5G. But with 5G, he stated that it might just take 4 to 6 months. And he said that, we have to block 5G and further expansion of 4G. And what we really need is these lawsuits coming through. Unfortunately, yeah, there are a lot of young people, and that obviously they care about the environment, but they're being duped by this climate change argument. And my direction with the younger generations, because a lot of our 5G events attract people from older age ranges, so 50s, 60s, and up. But with the younger generations, I just really make it known to them that I really care about what's happening with the planet. And I'm giving them this information because I care. And it's going to be uncomfortable for them to listen to, but they really need to know it. And then I start explaining about what's really happening with the changes in the temperature, and that it's the opposite of what they're really being told through the mainstream media. But we're up against the mainstream media, so it's not an easy battle.
Yeah, and the timelines really are succinct and are very telling. There's this mad rush to get 5G rolled out by 2023. Mm-hmm. That's the same years that, myself and most people in the grand solar minimum community put it the first year of absolute catastrophic crop losses where there just won't be enough food to feed everybody on the planet. Well, at this point, you're going to have the micronutrient and the nutrient deficiency in your bodies and all the other effects of the radiation around you. If your body's not even well fed enough and you're already going to go into a declined immune system state from all the waves around you, the wavelengths around you bombarding you consistently, and then we get into a famine situation or a very reduced calorific intake of quality foods, what's going to happen with the body there? You mentioned it, the population decline. Is this part of a wider agenda here? Because in 2023, there won't be enough food to feed everybody. And this is what massive fighting for food will begin in the streets. But at the same time, you're talking 5G needs to be all enrolled, and just within a year or so, it starts to have effects on people. It's too coincidental that the timelines are matching up step for step for step, lockstep from this point forward moving. It just doesn't make sense that they could be that coordinated, that intertwined, and that intersynced without some other nefarious purpose built into this whole grid system here on 5G.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, it just goes to show that, with the amount of propaganda that's pushed forward, the more we really try and resist. I mean, when I got started with 5G, I initially held an event in Totnes, and it was only a couple of months later when then Extinction Rebellion started to making a lot of noise on the mainstream media. And we've had situations like this where Mark Steele and I have tried to hold an event, and then something else has kicked off all of a sudden at the same time, like the Extinction Rebellion gathering. You couldn't make this thing up, But there are these control systems coming through, and we're being told that, oh, it's great, it's going to be sustainable. The United Nations, they're looking after us. But when you find out things like you have the International Telecommunications Union, which actually puts money into the United Nations, and the United Nations, their sustainable development goals are actually, we're told they're beneficial for us, then why do they include the recommended rollout of smart grids everywhere? And that technology is causing us harm. And it's not just some conspiracy. We have hundreds of doctors across the world campaigning against this, saying, look, this is causing us harm. So people have really got to engage with their critical thinking skills and, look outside the TV and start really investigating for themselves here. Because, I would say, yeah, it's not coincidental. I think all these things are being intertwined. And if we don't deal with it, if we don't raise the awareness of everybody else and connect with those other people who are like-minded and share this information, we're not going to have a chance. But we are building momentum, and we've just really got to keep that going.
Extinction Rebellion. A lot of people in the States are not familiar with Extinction Rebellion. You might hear it in passing, but to define it, if you were to walk up to somebody with a microphone on the street and, give them a quick interview and say, hey, what's Extinction Rebellion? They might say, aren't they trying to save polar bears or something like this? That's all they pretty much know. There's very little information about it. It's a worldwide phenomenon, if you will. But can you define it a little more for persons here listening that are in the States about what you see it as and how you perceive the narrative moving forward and what they're trying to accomplish? Because what you're seeing over there in the heart of the epicenter is so completely different than what we're getting on a news feed out here in North America.
Yeah, sure. So most people, will perceive them as being eco-activists trying to save the world, warning about global warming, reducing CO2 to net zero, and then appointing some sort of citizens' assembly, which is what they want, to then start making decisions on the environment. What I see it as is basically it's a movement that's been set up with funding from the government or from other areas. Of course, the telecommunications companies, you've got all these companies as well that are putting money in, these so-called green companies that are pushing driverless cars, electric cars, smart grids. You've got something called Extinction Rebellion Business. Extinction Rebellion posted about this a while ago. So what this is, it's actually a control system to get us off gas, to get us on electric. They want us all on electric. Now, Deborah Tavares, who obviously you conversed with at Ian Crane's Alternative View 10 event, she talked about this, about the banning of gas. It's come out in the newspapers here that they're planning to ban gas stoves by 2025. In Ireland, phasing out petrol-based cars, so moving to electric cars. And then, of course, you see all these skyscrapers going up in the cities like Manchester, where I've just been. Manchester's to be a smart city. You're going to have people living in these skyscrapers being bombarded with all of this radiation from the technology. And they're not going to have their gardens anymore, they're not going to have their land. It's a great way to control people. And a lot of this technology that's coming in, the smart meters, the surveillance cameras that are going up, it's basically a control system that they're bringing in. That's what the Sustainable Development Goals are about. It's pushed by the UN, the Rockefeller Foundation, they fund the UN. We've just got to research the connections here, but it's basically a control system being promoted as a grassroots movement, which it's not. And we know it's not because they're getting all the mainstream media attention. 5G isn't. They're allowed to take control of all these different streets. And yeah, that's what I think it is.
Go to net zero. I don't know if anybody understands what that means, but that means your farming machinery sits idle in a field because it runs on petrol. So I don't know how we're going to get to the farming aspect to continue to grow the amount of food that we would anyway. Forget the grand solar minimum for a moment and the crop yield reductions coming from decreased solar activity and out of sync weather patterns that are throwing off farmers into when they should plant and when they should harvest. Forget that for a moment. Step aside. But how do people in their right mind think that we're going to continue global agriculture on machines that run on fossil fuels to plow the fields, to harvest our crops, to process it in a factory that needs heat, generally it's natural gas, to be able to produce that food that you eat then? There's a huge disconnect here between this whole net zero and when you exhale, you breathe carbon dioxide out at 40,000 parts per million. Are they going to outlaw breathing in the future? And this is kind of the absurdity and lunacy where we're heading to. They're trying to outlaw wood stoves at the moment. San Francisco started this back in 2016 to outlaw wood stoves, like wood burning stoves, so you can create your own heat in your house. That way you don't have to rely on the power grid. You don't have to rely on the centralized system if you can create your own heat in winter. How many hundreds or thousands of dollars is that if you can heat your own home? I mean, these incredibly efficient wood-burning stoves that we have now, I mean, the amount of CO2 released out of those things is so minimal anyway. You probably put more CO2 out driving to work than you would burning a wood stove these days with the efficiency gains. And I mean, you put a toothpick in there and it can heat your house now. It's incredible. And I'm not joking either. It's like incredible the efficiency of these and how very little wood it takes to produce an enormous amount of heat. I'm surprised we haven't moved to biomass more anyway. But, you know, what you're talking about with the UN goals here and Extinction Rebellion for the business side of it sounds very much like Al Gore in the day of, when that first Inconvenient Truth movie was released, and then all their friends were suddenly large stake owners in solar panel companies, wind companies. You know, George Bush was a major owner in switchgrass companies to produce ethanol. You know, and then suddenly they're talking about switchgrass in the news, and they're the largest stakeholders in switchgrass ethanol companies. It's nothing more than a sham. It's nothing more than another way to make money. And, you know, that's my personal opinion.
Completely agree. And of course, long term, it's not going to make any money because, of course, with the sun dimming, where's the sunlight going to come for the solar panels? And what about the collapse in terms of population and health crises as a result of all this exposure to this electromagnetic radiation? I just can't see things continuing. And we've got a lot of mental health issues in kids. We just can't live with this technology.
This video is brought to you by our friends at TrueLeafMarket.com. Heirloom and organic seeds for any grow zone on our planet.